Hey, welcome back to the Big Ranch Show. Thank you for joining me. Now, over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of stuff going on, and none really more important to me than what just took place in Texas last week. Of course, here in Oklahoma, we saw negatives, negative 10 to negative 17, I think was one of the numbers that I saw thrown out before wind chill, which for Oklahoma is not normal. But even less normal are the temperatures that Texans saw during that same time span. Now, they were warmer than we were here, but Texas is not anywhere near ready for any kind of cold weather like that. Down where I used to live in Nacogdoches, it hit -2 in Deep East Texas. -2. Something that's really just not seen in the state of Texas. I lived in Texas my entire life until last April, and I never saw anything like that. In the last month, before last week, in the middle of January, they had a snowstorm down in Nacogdoches, Texas, that literally was unheard of. I mean, there was literally 3 to 4 inches of snow on the ground. And again, that happened last week. And yes, bad enough that it was really cold, that people were going to have to pay a lot for their electric bill just to keep themselves warm compared to normal. And if things had gone the way they were supposed to, everything would have been hunky-dory. Unfortunately, the Texas power grid came within 4 minutes of utter failure. A failure that would have cascaded out over months, leaving people without power and water for months. Literally would have rendered Texas, the entire state, a third world country. Now, I'm not sure where everyone's from that's watching this video, but I can tell you, Texas is definitely different. They do things different there than we would anywhere else in the country. In fact, the Texas power grid isn't even connected to the federal system. Why, you may ask? The answer is very easy. The answer is Texans didn't want regulation. They wanted to deregulate the whole thing, which in Texan speak really means the GOP wanted their cronies to make more money, so they deregulated it. And by doing so, they had to disconnect from the federal system. So had the grid entirely collapsed, which it came within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of doing, according to WFAA out of Dallas, they would have had nowhere to draw power from. They couldn't have called Oklahoma or California or somebody else in the country to bring power to them, because they're not connected to that system. It would have taken months to generate the power to get things back and running again. But, alas, what did the Texan government tell you? What did the governor, Ted Cruz, and Dan Patrick, and all of them tell you? Oh, it was the green renewable energies that caused it. That the wind turbines shut down. That wind turbines cannot function in the winter. Well, we know this to be utter bullshit. No matter where you're from, you know the fact that windmills can work in these wind turbines can work in any condition. The problem was ERCOT, the people that run everything in Texas, except for a few areas that are actually run by the same power grid that we are operated under here in Oklahoma. It didn't work. But they didn't do their job. Instead of ERCOT saying, hey, power generators, you must winterize your equipment, they didn't. They chose not to. They chose money over lives. And that's what it comes down to. ERCOT wanted to make more money for their generators, so they didn't force them to do anything. Very few of the power generators actually winterize their equipment. Now you think, oh, they only had a week to do it. No. They were told a decade ago a decade ago by their own people that they needed to fix this. Federal regulators told them a decade ago that, yeah, we can't tell you what to do, but you need to do this winterization. But what really failed in Texas, what really fell apart in Texas, was not renewable energy. In fact, during the winter, renewable energy in Texas runs for about 10 to 15% of the entire power generated for the state. In fact, most power is generated by oil and or natural gas, mostly natural gas in the state of Texas. Those power generators went offline. A nuclear power plant went offline because of the freezing weather froze part of the water used to cool the nuclear reactor. So a unit of a nuclear reactor had to go down. They had to shut it down for safety regulations. That went down on Monday, and it didn't come back up until late Tuesday. People wanted to blame Joe Biden for it not coming back online right away. The thing is, though, it had nothing to do with what Joe Biden wanted to do. It had everything to do with the safety of the nuclear reactor. You can't just fire up a nuclear reactor and all of a sudden you're good to go. When something bad happens, like frozen water, you have to wait for that water to be proper again. You can't just let it be frozen. So it took them a while to get that back to running. The natural gas power plants quit functioning. Here in Oklahoma, we had some problems. We had a few problems here and there. But guess what? Because of regulations, nothing got too out of whack. The biggest problem that people in Oklahoma had, and the main reason we had to deal with a few rolling blackouts throughout the state, wasn't because the power generators failed, but because the hardware that allows them to access the stored natural gas broke because of the sub-freezing or the sub-zero temperatures, and being in a below freezing state for over a week in a situation where they weren't ready for it. Because once again, this is not normal. But they go off and tell you that renewables can't work in the winter, right? But they work in places like, I don't know, Iowa, where the people that aren't on the SPP connection, which is what we are here, their power is generated by 40% wind power during the winter. I wonder how they're able to pull that off as bad as the winters can get up that direction. In other parts of the world where it gets freezing temperatures all the time, they're able to keep their wind turbines functioning. So no, this is definitely not an indictment of, green energy cannot work. That's a pile of BS, and we all know it. The fact is, the Texan power grid failed because of deregulation. The experiment of deregulation of the power grid failed. That's it, plain and simple. There are no other explanations. The people at ERCOT were negligent in the handling of the situation. They've been negligent on the handling of the situation for over a decade. They should be held accountable. Now, they never will. They'll never be charged with any kind of crime. They'll never have to pay anything. And they're going to reap all the rewards. You're looking at people now getting $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 electric bills and power bills. Either from trying to use natural gas to heat their houses, or their electricity, who use natural gas to heat their houses. And the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, says, oh, these people aren't going to have to pay these bills. And then he turns around and says, oh, well, they'll be able to pay them off over time. No, that's not how that should work. These people should not have to pay for the negligence and incompetence of ERCOT and the other power producers in the state. Not one person should have to pay a dime more than they normally would after what they did. People died. At last check I saw, about 24 Texans died And I believe it's even more than that now, because that was almost 3 days ago. They have no water in number of parts of the state. They had no power, even in the place where I used to live, for over 3 days. A woman in the apartment complex I used to live in down there, in fact, passed away before the power could come back on. So don't sit there and try to act like this is something new, like this wasn't expected, because it was expected. They chose greed. They chose money over human lives. And each and every one of them should be held accountable. And I don't just mean the companies that generate the power, or ERCOT, but every single one of the political leaders in the state of Texas should be held responsible for what happened to those 24 plus people. And yeah, some people say, well, it's Texas, just forget about it. But I can't. They're still Americans. I know their elected leaders are absolutely incompetent, utterly corrupt. But the people don't deserve this. When they decided they were going to deregulate back in 2002, I remember them talking about doing it. And it seemed like such a great idea at the time, because it was going to bring choice. We were going to have options on who we could get our power from, supposedly to drive down the cost of power, which it did. But at that cost, they didn't maintain anything, right? They didn't maintain their equipment. They didn't make sure it was able to handle a winter or something as severe as this, which we knew was coming. Even with the weak, even if, say, they hadn't been warned a decade ago, these leaders and the people of ERCOT, they knew that this was coming over a week in advance. I was seeing stuff on the Weather Channel talking about a severe outbreak of extreme cold weather back in January for February. They were seeing it then, almost 3 weeks prior. But that's just a little bit of the problem, right? But Greg Abbott, corrupt as all get out. Dan Patrick, corrupt. The Attorney General, Ken Paxton, corrupt. And the entirety of ERCOT, corrupt. They're all in the business of making money, whether or not you survive or not. So to my friends and those other Texans, people that I used to consider my fellow Texans before I moved, take this as a warning of what's to come. You have people in your state talking about seceding from the Union. This is what you'll live under. But there won't be any help coming. Right now, Texas is surviving only because the federal government is sending aid. That's how the state government is going to succeed in being able to rebuild the state and put the state back together. Now, for the people of Texas, they always come together and they do what they have to for their neighbors. I think that's how it is pretty much everywhere you go. But I know in Texas, that's how, when I was there, we always did things. If there was a disaster, we came together as a state to help other people in the state. But this time, it's not a natural disaster like a hurricane that you have no control over. This was just bitter cold that we could have controlled. Here in Oklahoma, like I said, we had a few rolling blackouts and things were fine. But that's not how it went down in Texas. And during the peak of all the madness in Texas, the bursting pipes, the no water, the no electricity, people dying in their homes of hypothermia. Ted Cruz abandoned the state of Texas. He fled off to Mexico. He's one of those people that claims to be a man. A man's man, right? like a manly man, you know, like a Tim Taylor, from Tool Time, from Home Improvement back in the 90s, kind of man, right? You see him firing an AR-15 with bacon wrapped around the barrel, like he's some kind of tough mountain man, like he's some grizzly tough man. But when the going got tough, the little cuck known as Ted Cruz ran to Mexico, using his daughters as an excuse. Using his daughters as an excuse for why he was a chicken shit. He left my friends and my family to freeze. Luckily, my family turned out okay. My friends mostly turned out okay. But at the end of the day, he should pay for every single life that he abandoned. Yes, my family turned out okay. But others did not. If it was in my power, I would do everything I could to make sure he loses his next election. If I was independently wealthy, I would be funneling so much money to his opponent that he wouldn't be able to breathe under it. I don't support anything other than, voting him out. I don't support any other way of doing it. But I can tell you right now that I am not going to sit here and mince words. This son of a bitch needs to go. That is all there is to it. Ted Cruz is a coward. Ted Cruz is a pile of shit, and I hope he loses his next election. I made the mistake of voting for him in 2012. It never happens. It never happened again. When I had a chance to vote against him, I did. But you see, there's two sides of the coin here. You got the coward Ted Cruz, who, like a little chicken shit, ran to Mexico to get away from it while abandoning not just the Texas people, but his dog in a house with no food, no water, and no warmth. He had just abandoned his dog as well. But besides that, you had that coward. You had that pile of crap. But then you had AOC. AOC and Beto O'Rourke, who were there for the Texan people. AOC went down and worked at a food pantry in Houston to help people get warm meals and food. Make sure people in Texas were taken care of. She raised over $5 million to help feed and clothe Texans. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz had abandoned the state. Who cares about your fellow Texans? Not Ted Cruz. AOC was there, making sure people were okay, making sure people were fed, getting the warmth they needed. Ted Cruz was flying away like a coward. Beto O'Rourke and his people were canvassing neighborhoods, making phone calls to senior citizens that they could get a hold of to see if they were okay. And the ones that weren't were able to be brought to warming stations, as they called them, to get a hot meal, maybe a shower. They care. Ted Cruz did not. Greg Abbott did not. Greg Abbott told you lies. Dan Patrick told you lies. Ted Cruz fled like a coward. AOC and Beto O'Rourke stayed there to help you. Remember that at election time. Remember that it was the liberals that showed up to save your ass, not Ted Cruz, not the GOP, and not the leaders of your government. Anyways, this has been the Big Rant Show. I've been your host, Jacob Keck, and I'll see you down the road.